Now I'd like to introduce Norma Flores López and Chris Jones to help us better understand firsthand the impact of lack of regulation and enforcement. Norma began working in cornfields in Indiana at the age of 12 and continued to work in the fields of Iowa, Michigan, and Texas until she graduated from high school. Norma went on to graduate from the University of Texas and is now an active advocate for migrant farm worker children's rights. Chris Jones is the brother of Gordon Jones, a mud engineer who was killed as a result of an explosion aboard the Deepwater Horizon oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico almost 1 year ago. Norma and Chris, would you share your experiences and the messages you would like to send home with the audience and the rest of the panel today?
Let me move this on over. There we go. This one I wish I had longer arms. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire was a terrible tragedy with great loss, but something great came out of this. The collective response to this event helped push to make the American workplace safer. A key change that came from this was one to protect the nation's future. Stricter child labor laws were enacted as part of the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. Most of us would be outraged if we saw children around us sacrificing their education and their childhoods to work. How comfortable would we be having children working in America's most dangerous industries? Children working on construction sites or children working in mines? Well, what about the children that are working in one of the other three most dangerous industries? What about having kids working in agriculture? You know, how would we feel about having children out there working using sharp tools, being exposed to dangerous chemicals? Yet, this is something that is allowed. Even though, thankfully, children are not allowed in construction sites or the mines, they are allowed in agriculture to be working out there at really young ages. Most of us here would be surprised to know that in agriculture, it is perfectly legal for a 12-year-old to be working out an unlimited amount of hours outside of school. So a 12-year-old during its summer months is allowed to be able to go out and work in one of the most dangerous conditions, out in extreme weather conditions, being exposed daily to pesticides for 70 to 80 hours a week without any days off for sometimes a month straight. And these aren't just stories that I hear now as an advocate for farm worker children. This is something that I got to live for myself. That was how my summers were spent, with very, very few protections out there. Furthermore, the current labor laws also lower the hazardous work age to be just 16 years old in agriculture, and allowing minors to be able to perform hazardous work where it's work that's strictly reserved for adults in every other industry. So how is it exactly that farm worker children tie in with these young women that were working at the shirtwaist factory? Well, for one thing, you know, just like these young immigrant women, these kids farm worker children come from an impoverished, comes from an exploited immigrant community. And they work in very, very similar working conditions like the ones we heard earlier today being described that horrified all of us. You know, hearing about long hours, hearing about working in dangerous conditions, having to provide their own tools. If you speak to farm workers, they're expected to be able to provide the very sharp tools that they're out there using, with unsanitary conditions, no bathrooms. You know, for me being out there working in the fields, it was actually quite a welcome surprise to be able to find a clean bathroom that actually had toilet paper in it while I was working out there in those rural conditions. You know, these kids are expected to be out there working, as I mentioned, in some of the most dangerous conditions with, you know, 100-degree heat outside with sometimes no water anywhere near you. And then the hits that these kids get to their education, we see that more than half of these kids don't even graduate from high school. And yet very few companies are held responsible, many times pushing off the blame to the contractors that are hiring these groups of farm workers and not taking any responsibility for these terrible conditions when they are discovered, and sometimes not even held accountable for the fines that they are given. Now, what we heard this morning were a couple of lessons learned that we supposedly learned, but did we really? One that really stood out is that the market cannot determine the workplace conditions and safety, and yet, the Representative Roba Allard introduced the Children's Act for Responsible Employment that would equalize the child labor laws. This is a bill that has been promoted by the Child Labor Coalition and AFOP, and yet our biggest pushback has been from agriculture. We haven't been able to get much support because agriculture is not supporting this. We're allowing them to be able to tell us what the conditions should be like, and letting them continue to use child labor to be able to keep their bottom line high. Another lesson that we learned was that consumers are responsible for ensuring that the goods that they receive are not made in exploitative conditions. We all need food. Half of our incomes go to food. What is it that we are saying with our dollars? We are all responsible for the well-being of those farm worker children that are out there. And awareness continues to be a big issue for us and for people to be able to, people don't know about this problem because they're an invisible population that's out in rural conditions. So I encourage you guys to join AFOP as we celebrate the Year of the Farm Worker Child, an awareness campaign for 2011 where we try to be able to bring more awareness about the conditions these kids are put under and the effects that it has on their lives.